My name is Evelyn. The room fell into an absolute silence as I stood up, smoothing down the hideous mustard yellow bridesmaid dress. Marcus' champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. His eyes were wide with shock, and Patricia's mouth hung open. I took a deep breath and began to explain. My name is Evelyn Thompson, and I'm the founder and CEO of Thompson Global Logistics. We're the largest privately held supply chain management company in North America, with operations in 47 countries and an annual revenue of $4.2 billion. The so-called grocery store job Marcus mentioned? That's how I started. It all began 7 years ago. I was in my early 20s, full of ambition and a thirst for knowledge. I was building my first distribution center, but I knew I needed hands-on experience in the food retail industry. So, I worked nights at a local supermarket, scanning barcodes and stocking shelves from midnight to 6 a.m. I wanted to understand every aspect of how products moved from suppliers to the shelves, how inventory management worked at the store level, and how customer demand patterns shifted. Most executives learned this stuff from spreadsheets and consultants, but I learned it the hard way. When my family asked about my work during those early years, I'd say I was in food retail or working in supply chain logistics. Somehow, they translated that into me working at a grocery store. The first time I tried to explain what Thompson Global Logistics actually did, Uncle Henry, a strict and traditional accountant in his 50s, patted my shoulder and said, "That's great, dear. It's good that you're ambitious about your supermarket job." When I mentioned hiring my first 100 employees, Aunt Lucy, a well-meaning but rather narrow-minded woman in her late 40s, nodded supportively and said, "Oh, are you managing a department now? That's wonderful progress." After a while, I stopped trying to correct them. It was easier to let them think what they wanted than to deal with their skepticism. And to be honest, part of me was curious to see how long they could maintain their delusions about my life. The morning of my brother Max's wedding started just like every other family gathering in the past 5 years. I was in my hotel room at the Ritz-Carlton, looking at the mustard yellow bridesmaid dress that Max's fiancée, Lily, had specifically chosen for me. Mom called with her final instructions. "Evelyn, sweetheart, I know this is hard for you," she said in that tone she'd perfected, a mix of sympathy and condescension. Being around all of Max's successful friends and seeing Lily's family with their achievements. Just remember that not everyone can be a doctor or a lawyer. I zipped up the dress that made me look like a walking banana and replied, "I'll keep that in mind. And don't worry, I won't mention my job situation unless someone asks directly. It's Max's day, and we don't want people feeling uncomfortable." My family had always seen my job as a situation, as if it were a medical condition that required delicate handling. In reality, Thompson Global Logistics was a powerhouse. We handled distribution for 30% of the Fortune 500, had revolutionized cold chain logistics for pharmaceutical companies, and were just 3 days away from closing the largest merger in our industry's history. The rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding was a nightmare. Lily's family were all high achievers. Her father, Mr. Harris, had built a successful real estate development company. Her brother, Ryan, had just sold his tech startup for $50 million. Her mother, Mrs. Harris, was a well-known corporate lawyer. During cocktails, Ryan asked me, "Evelyn, Max mentioned you work in food service. Are you planning to open your own restaurant?" Before I could answer, Max jumped in. "Oh, no. Evelyn is not the entrepreneur type. She works at a supermarket. It's honest work, though." There was a painful pause in the conversation. Ryan recovered quickly, but I saw Mr. and Mrs. Harris exchange a glance. They were clearly wondering how a family with so many successful members had produced someone whose biggest achievement seemed to be avoiding unemployment. I simply said, "Food retail is fascinating. The logistics alone are incredibly complex." Mr. Harris replied kindly, then immediately changed the subject to Max's law practice. Later that evening, I overheard Mrs. Harris talking to my mother by the hotel bar. Lily mentioned Evelyn might be a godmother to their children someday, she said carefully. Oh, Evelyn would love that, Mom replied. She's wonderful with kids. Of course, she's not in a position to be much of a financial influence, but she's very loving. Financial influence? Well, you know, she's still finding her way professionally. We help her out when we can. Family takes care of family, but your grandchildren will have plenty of successful role models without needing to worry about Evelyn's situation. I left the bar after that and spent the rest of the evening in my room, reviewing acquisition reports and wondering why I'd thought attending this wedding was a good idea. The morning of the ceremony brought more humiliation. During hair and makeup, the other bridesmaids, Lily's sister and 2 college friends, were discussing their careers. One was a fashion designer launching her second collection, another was a financial analyst at a top-tier firm, and the third was a marketing manager at a global brand. When they asked about me, Lily explained, Evelyn works in a supermarket. She's been doing that for years now. Oh, that must be stable work, the fashion designer said politely. Very stable, I agreed, not mentioning that Thomson Global's stability came from having exclusive contracts with every major food retailer in North America. The conversation then moved on to their vacation plans. One had a family house in the Maldives, another was planning a month in South America. When they asked about my travel plans, I simply said I didn't have any scheduled, rather than explaining that I'd be in Hong Kong next week finalizing a $1.8 billion merger, followed by board meetings in Paris and a factory opening in Italy. The wedding ceremony itself was beautiful. Lily looked radiant in her grandmother's lace dress, and Max seemed genuinely happy. I stood at the altar holding the bridal bouquet, trying to focus on their joy instead of the whispered comments from various relatives about my appearance. Poor Evelyn. That color is so unflattering on her. Lily should have chosen something more appropriate for her complexion, I heard Aunt Lucy tell someone behind me. The dress isn't the problem. It's the stress. Financial pressure ages you, someone else whispered back. I maintained my smile throughout the ceremony, even when the photographer positioned me slightly behind the other bridesmaids for the formal photos. For composition, he explained, though everyone understood it was to minimize the visual impact of the family member who didn't quite fit. The reception was held in the Ritz-Carlton's Grand Ballroom, a beautiful space that I'd actually considered purchasing 2 years ago before deciding the location wasn't right for my real estate portfolio. The dinner was excellent, but I barely tasted it as I endured toast after toast that celebrated everyone's achievements except mine. Max raised his champagne glass and said, to Lily's family, Mrs. Harris, who's dedicated her life to justice. To Ryan, who just sold his company for more money than most of us will see in a lifetime. To Mr. Harris, who built his real estate empire from nothing. Then he turned to our side of the room. To my family, Uncle Henry, who just made partner at his accounting firm after 20 years of dedication. To Cousin Greg, who opened his second law firm this year. To Lily's maid of honor, Sarah, who's making waves in the fashion industry. His eyes found mine during the pause. And to family members who support us in their own special ways. My sister Evelyn, who flew all the way from New York to be here despite the expense. She works in food service, which is honest, necessary work, and we love her for her dedication to simpler values. The applause was polite but pointed. Several people looked at me with the kind of gentle sympathy usually reserved for recovering addicts or the recently divorced. It was during the dancing portion that the real drama began. I stepped onto the terrace for some air when I overheard a conversation that would change everything. Mrs. Harris was speaking with Max near the bar, her voice sharp with concern. Max, I need to ask you something directly. Is Evelyn financially stable? I don't mean to pry, but Lily mentioned she might want Evelyn to be godmother to their children. And given her circumstances. Evelyn, God knows, she's been struggling for years, Max laughed. She's sweet, but she can barely take care of herself. She's been working the same supermarket job for what, 7 years now? Never got promoted, never tried anything else. I think she's just not built for ambition. Mrs. Harris looked relieved. I was concerned about the influence. Not that there's anything wrong with her work, of course, but Lily comes from a family of achievers. Her father built his company from nothing. Her brother just made $50 million on his startup. We want our grandchildren to have the right kind of role models. Don't worry about that, Max said. Evelyn's basically the family charity case at this point. Mom sends her money for rent sometimes. We all chip in for her car payments. She means well, but she's just not capable of more than she's doing now. That wasn't true. I'd never asked for or received financial help from anyone in my family. But apparently, that was the story they told themselves to make sense of my deliberately modest lifestyle choices. Just then, I heard Greg's voice from around the corner, talking to some of Lily's relatives. Did you see Evelyn's car in the parking lot? It's like 15 years old. I actually felt embarrassed for her when the valet had to figure out how to start it. Max mentioned she's been using food stamps. Another voice, one of Lily's cousins, replied, I thought it's just sad. Greg continued, the whole family is successful except her. My mom thinks she might have some kind of learning disability that was never diagnosed. How else do you explain someone working the same entry-level job for 7 years? At least she seems happy, the cousin said charitably. I guess ignorance is bliss, Greg replied. She has no idea how far behind she's fallen. I'd heard enough. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Jake, my head of security, ready for pickup. His response came immediately, 10 minutes, helicopter fueled and ready. I made my way back to the ballroom, planning to say quiet goodbyes and slip away before the evening got worse. But as I reached the main table, Max tapped his champagne glass for attention. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, I want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here tonight. Lily and I are so grateful to be surrounded by such successful, accomplished people. Our families represent the absolute best of what hard work and ambition can achieve. He gestured around the room. We have entrepreneurs who've built million-dollar companies, lawyers fighting for justice, executives running major corporations, people who've taken risks, pushed boundaries, refused to settle for less than excellence. His eyes found mine across the room, and there was something almost pitying in his expression. But we're also grateful for family members who contribute in simpler ways. My sister Evelyn flew all the way from New York to be here tonight, even though I know the cost was probably difficult for her budget. She works in food service, which is honest, humble work. Not everyone can be a CEO or a fashion designer, and that's perfectly okay. The applause was polite but condescending. Several people looked at me with the kind of sympathy usually reserved for someone announcing a terminal diagnosis. Evelyn represents something important, Max continued, warming to his theme. In a world obsessed with achievement and status, she reminds us that there's dignity in simple work, value in modest goals. She's content with her life, and that's actually quite admirable. Lily's father stood up, clearly feeling generous after several glasses of wine. To Evelyn, for showing us that happiness doesn't require success. The room raised their glasses to me like I was some kind of inspirational poster about overcoming limitations. I could see pity in their eyes, mixed with relief that their own children had turned out so much better. That's when my phone buzzed. A tall man in an impeccable black suit appeared beside me without anyone noticing. Jake, my head of security, said, I'm Jake, your head of security. I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent situation that requires your immediate attention. The conversations around us stopped. Jake had the kind of presence that commanded rooms, standing at 6 feet 2 inches with an air of professional alertness and wearing an expensive suit. Security? Mrs. Harris repeated, looking confused. The helicopter is waiting on the roof, Jake continued smoothly. Your 9 p.m. conference call with the Hong Kong team cannot be delayed. The Lee Industries merger closes Monday morning, and the Tokyo markets open in 3 hours. The board is waiting for your final approval on the $1,800,000,000 acquisition. That's how we got to this moment, with me standing up and revealing my true identity. As I continued to explain the scale and success of Thomson Global Logistics, I could see the shock and disbelief on their faces. Max grabbed my arm and said, "Evelyn, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him and replied, "Tell you what, that I was successful? Would it have mattered? Based on what I overheard tonight, you all seemed pretty comfortable with your version of who I was. The family charity case, the one who needed financial help, the learning disabled sister who was too limited for real achievement." Derek protested weakly, "We never said you were learning disabled." I shot back, "You literally said that 20 minutes ago on the terrace, along with speculating about my food stamp usage and expressing embarrassment about my car." Mr. Harris was still staring at me in shock. You actually run a billion-dollar company? She's on the Forbes list?" Someone whispered from the back of the room. One of the younger cousins held up her phone. "Evelyn Thomson, CEO of Thomson Global Logistics. Net worth estimated at $2,300,000,000. The murmur that went through the room was like watching dominoes fall. Aunt Lucy said, her voice almost accusatory, "If you're so wealthy, why do you dress so modestly? Why do you drive an old car? Why live like a normal person?" "Because money isn't the most important thing in life," I said. "I thought family was. I thought showing up for people you love mattered more than showing off your net worth. I thought being humble about success was a virtue." Max was shaking his head. "But you let us think you were struggling." "I didn't let you think anything, Max. You assumed. You all did. You decided that because I didn't brag about my accomplishments at every family gathering, I must not have any. You created an entire narrative about my life, complete with financial problems I don't have and limitations I've never shown, without ever asking me a single direct question about what I actually do for work." Lily protested, "But you said you worked in food retail." "I said I worked in food retail logistics. When I mentioned supply chain management, you nodded politely and changed the subject. When I talked about hiring employees, you assumed I meant I was managing a supermarket department. When I said I traveled for business, you figured I meant training sessions at other locations." The room was completely silent now, everyone processing the magnitude of their assumptions. "You know what's funny?" I continued. 3 years ago, when I missed Christmas, you all decided it was because I couldn't afford the plane ticket. The truth is, I was in Tokyo personally negotiating a contract that brought 2,000 manufacturing jobs back to the United States. Last year, when I couldn't make Greg's wedding, you assumed I was working extra shifts to make rent. Actually, I was in Italy opening our newest facility that now employs 1,500 people. Greg looked like he might be sick. Jake interrupted gently, "Miss Thomson, the helicopter." I nodded. "I really do have to go. Hong Kong doesn't wait. And there are a lot of people depending on this deal closing successfully." As I moved toward the exit, the room parted around me like I was visiting royalty. The same people who'd been pitying me 5 minutes ago were now staring with a mixture of confusion and what I was pretty sure was embarrassment. At the door, I turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, Max, I hope you and Lily are very happy together. Marriage should be about loving someone as they are, not as you assume they should be. Maybe that's something worth remembering." The elevator ride to the roof was silent except for the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Jake held the door for me as we stepped onto the hotel's helipad, where my pilot was waiting with the rotors already spinning. "How was the wedding, ma'am?" Jake asked as he helped me into the helicopter, having to raise his voice over the noise. "Educational," I replied, buckling my seatbelt and putting on the headset. As we lifted off, I could see people gathered on the hotel's lower terraces, looking up at the helicopter with obvious confusion. My phone was already buzzing with calls and texts. Max, Greg, Aunt Lucy, numbers I didn't recognize. I turned off the phone and looked out at the city lights below. Tomorrow, I'd be back to managing supply chains, board meetings, and the thousand small decisions that kept a global company running smoothly. Tonight had been a reminder of why I kept those worlds separate. But maybe it was time to stop hiding who I'd become. Maybe the people who truly mattered would love me anyway, and the ones who didn't, well, perhaps their approval wasn't worth having after all. Hong Kong, ma'am? The pilot asked through the headset. Actually, I said, let's make a quick stop at the office first. I want to change out of this dress. It's terrible, and I have a feeling the Hong Kong meeting is going to be photographed. Jake smiled. Yes, ma'am. I did.